All right. So, my name is Peter. I am a developer relations engineer on the Firebase team at Google. So, for a quick show of hands, who here has used Firebase before? All right. So, it seems like at least a third of you. So, for everybody else, just a quick pitch, Firebase is not just a database. We started out as a real-time database, but now it's an entire platform that makes it easier to build mobile and web applications. We provide all the services that you don't want to build because they're just like baseline, so that you can concentrate on implementing the amazing features that your users are looking for. So that is Firebase in a nutshell. If you want to follow me, here are a couple of social handles. The GitHub repository might be interesting because if enough of you ask me to publish the code that I'm going to show you, it will be on the GitHub repository. So, where am I from? I live in Hamburg. I live in Hamburg. I live in Hamburg. And I work at Google. I'm a developer advocate and developer relations engineer on the Firebase team. I've written a couple of books. I'm also an iOS fanboy. I record lots of videos, so that was for Google I/O, and I do live streams both on the Firebase channel and on my own personal channel where I build, where I currently build a second brain application that uses lots of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. And I have stickers with me. So if you want stickers, come see me after the talk. And I love Keynote. So let's talk about LLMs. LLMs are fantastic. They can do amazing things. For example, coming to Amsterdam and maybe not knowing what should I see and do, you might ask, give me the top 3 sites in Amsterdam, and please be concise so it fits on the screen. And you might get this answer: the Anne Frank House, the Van Gogh Museum, and the Amsterdam canals. So, great. But what if you ask, will my flight be on time? The answer will probably be, I can't tell you definitively whether your flight will be on time, as I don't have real-time access to flight tracking databases or your specific flight information. Well, you might also ask, I'm traveling to a place in the UK next week. Who's the author of the thriller that plays there that I read recently? The answer to that would be, that's an interesting question, but I need a little more information to help you. The UK is home to countless thrillers set in various locations. So, what's the problem here? LLMs are kind of constrained to their training data. And there is a cutoff date, right? So it's only the public data, and it's a good thing that LLMs are only trained on public data because even if they were trained on private data, it would probably be not a good idea, because if I then asked, what's on my to-do list, the LLM might answer with your to-dos, and that's probably not what I was interested in. So it's a good thing that LLMs are only trained on public data. But we might want to do something like looking into enterprise data, for example, a product catalog for product recommendations, or look into a user database with personal knowledge, right? My personal to-do list, for example. And we might also be interested to call APIs to do something. Or we might want to remotely control our applications that run on our devices. So most of you probably know what you can do in those cases. So in the case of accessing enterprise data or user data, you can use a technology or a technique called retrieval augmented generation, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about how it works in a moment. And for accessing APIs and apps, there's something called tool calling. So how do these techniques work? So let's look at the data case first. So we've got our index, and that might be a product catalog or personal user data knowledge. The user asks a query, for example, let's say my nephew has a birthday coming up and I am looking for a gift, right? So I might ask, I need a gift for a 10-year-old boy, can you please recommend me something? And then I go to a website that is a warehouse and offers lots of goods, and it would go and look into the index and retrieve the most matching items, right? So it would take my query, compute vector embeddings, and then take those vector embeddings, retrieve the most matching products, and then take their descriptions and inject them into the prompt. And the prompt might be something like, you are a product recommendation expert. Here are a couple of products that match the user's query. The user asks, blah, 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 what's a good gift for a 10-year-old boy? Can you please answer the question? And then the model goes off and generates the answer, and the answer might be, oh, for a 10-year-old boy, a Lego set of the space shuttle might be absolutely fantastic. So, but what about tool calling? Let's imagine we want to answer the question, is my flight on time? What do you need to do that? So first of all, you need to look into the user's calendar. So we need a tool to do that. And the tool knows how to talk to the API of the calendar that we're using. We need another tool that can retrieve the current time because as funny as it seems, LLMs have no idea about what's the current time, so we need a tool for that. And we need a tool to access a flight API. So let's look at how we can implement this with Genkit. And before I show you some code and we do a live demo, first a little bit about what Genkit is. So Genkit is Google's AI integration framework for full-stack app developers. Here is our website, genkit.dev. And there are a couple of things I want to call out. It's an open source framework, so you can go to the GitHub repository, you can see the entire source code, you can contribute and inspect how it works. Also, it supports your favorite language, Node or JavaScript/TypeScript, Go, and Python. And you can deploy it anywhere, right? So you don't have to deploy it to Google Cloud, although we would love you for that. You don't have to deploy it to Firebase, although I would love you for that. You can run it anywhere. You could even run it on a Raspberry Pi if you wanted. I don't know if that's a good idea, but it works. So let's do a quick demo. So I've got is that large enough for you to read? So I've got a little application here. It's written in TypeScript, and I'm going to give you a very, very quick rundown of what it does. So one, I've got a couple of tools here. And the first tool is a tool that reads calendar events. And I've just mocked them up to make it easier. So there's a couple of flights and a couple of other events. So that's one thing. Then I've got a tool for retrieving the current time. So that basically just creates a new date and then returns the date in different formats so that the LLM has all the different ways to how you would specify a date. And then we've got another tool, get flight data, and that actually calls a remote API. I'm using Aviation Stack here. And of course, I need to tell this tool what is the input data. So I say, well, the user might provide a flight number and a date, and please can you return the flight number and the date again, and then any flights and details and errors. So AI.define tool, that is part of Genkit. So define tool is a way how you can define a tool and make it known to Genkit. So I've started Genkit in the background. I can open the developer console or develop the developer UI in my browser. And this is just a playground where you can play around with all the models that we have registered or that you have registered in your application. So I could go in and say, okay, I want to use Gemini 2.5 Flash, for example. and then do something like, what is the current time? And it would probably say that it has no idea. Or it comes up with something completely left field. Let's see. Well, that is actually impressive. That is the longest answer I've gotten for what is the time. All right. So, but I told you we have a tool, right? So we can go and take a look at the cool tool for getting the time. So I can run the tool, and the tool gives me the actual current time, right? So it's 1:10. So now I can go back to the model runner and say, well, I need to go back and use the correct model, 2.5 flash, and then go and switch on the tool and ask the same thing again, and then fingers crossed, oh wow. Oh, look at that. Thanks. All right, so now we get a better answer, and what happens is the model says, well, I can't answer this question, so I need a tool, and then our application says, I've got a tool, or the tool realizes, well, you told me you have a tool, can you please call the tool? And then the application calls the tool, returns the data to the model, and then the model says, well, the current time is. So one of the amazing things of Genkit is that you can actually go in and inspect what's happening. So you can go in and inspect the so-called trace. So you can see the generate call, and if I expand this, this is what the user said. What is the current time? And down here we have the final result. The current time is 12:01. And you can see that we call the model once, but then in this response from the model actually says, well, can you please call a tool? So here we get a candidate, and it says, please call this tool that you registered with me. So the app calls the tool, this is the output, and then passes in this output to the model. It's here, and then the model actually will be called again, and this is our final response. So that is how tool calling works. All right, so let's see. Oh yeah. So there is another thing that I wanted to show. So Genkit has the concept of flows. And a flow is like a function, but it's also instrumented, right? So for example, I can go in and use this flow here, that's called isFlightOnTime, and run this. And this will go into the calendar, or it will first go into the calendar, tries to find any flight events on my calendar, then tries to get the current time. Well, first goes to get the time, then goes into the calendar for the current time, finds the flights, and then goes to the flight API to get the flight data. And this is the answer, right? So Lufthansa flight, LH1 from Hamburg to Frankfurt, and then we can see all the data, and this is the answer. All right, so this is how tool calling works. But there is a problem. Let's imagine that you want to write another application where you need to use similar tools. So you'll have to wire this up all over again, and that's just a lot of work. So instead of doing that, why don't we try to come up with a standard? And the standard is the Model Context Protocol, invented or envisioned by the people at Anthropic, and they call it the USB-C port for AI applications. And here is how it works. So we have our local system, and there is a host application, and the host application can be your IDE, for example, or it can be Claude Cloud Desktop or Genkit or any other host. And then we've got what's called an MCP server. And the MCP server is basically just like a universal translator between the host application and whatever API you want to call. So for example, if I want to call my time tool, I can write an MCP server that talks to the time tool. Or if I want to create an MCP server that talks to my database, I can create an MCP server that talks to my database. And then any other MCP host can talk to my database or to my flight API. So we've got local data sources, but what about remote data sources? So let's say I've got a service that lives on the internet. So again, I would write an MCP server, and that MCP server runs locally and then talks to the remote system. On the very top there, you see what's called the MCP protocol, and it says standard I/O, SSE, server send events, or custom protocol. So the default protocol for Model Context Protocol is standard I/O, and that means when your host wants to talk to your server, it will all be on standard I/O, and all the communication will be piped on standard I/O. And that is why, if you're writing an MCP server, please don't log to the console, because that will completely confuse your host. So, building MCP servers, let's look at a couple of ways how you can do that. So the first way is you can use the official SDKs. There are SDKs for Python, TypeScript, Java, quite surprising for me, Kotlin, C#, and Swift, which I love. And then there's Genkit. So let's take a look at how you can build an MCP server with Genkit. So here's our documentation that's also available in an AI-readable format, so to make it easier for all your coding agents. And the first thing you need to do is you need to install Genkit and the MCP plugin into your TypeScript application, and then you define a tool. And we saw how to define a tool right in the beginning. So here we have a very simple hello world tool. So I've got the AI.define tool call to define the tool. I define the input and the output schema to say what goes in, what comes out. And then I've got my function body. And that can be anything. So here we have really just a hello world, but you could call an API. You could even call a local application if you wanted. So then we set up the server, and that's all there is to it. Because we've registered all our tools on this AI instance, all those tools will automatically be registered as MCP tools. And then finally, we connect the transport, and that's it. So now we're in business. And let's do another quick demo. So lots of demos today. And so far, we've been doing well. So let's go to this one here. Oh, I should probably hide my secrets. So we've got our time tool, and we've got our getFlight data tool. So this one exposes the flight API as an MCP tool. So let's go back to the Genkit dev UI, and I can see that I've got my getCurrentTime tool and getFlight data tool. So let's see, I can look for LH1, and that is a Lufthansa flight from Hamburg to Frankfurt, the very earliest in the morning. And this is how it did today. So this is actual data coming from the flight API. I can also go in, and now it gets really interesting. Was Lufthansa 1 on time this morning? Okay, so no idea, because we don't have a tool registered. Now let's activate all the tools and try this again. So this might or might not work. All right, here we go. So it got the time, it got the flight data, and then the model says, no, Lufthansa 1 was not on time this morning. It departed at 6:18, 18 minutes delay. And then we can also look at the trace, and we can see all of the communication between the model and the tool. So this is what you do in the developer UI, but you can also do the same in other hosts. So let's take a look at Claude, and I've registered my flight data MCP server here. So, and also this is connected to my calendar. So let's take a look at my calendar. What's on my calendar for today? All right, so it wants to read my calendar, so we can probably see what's going on here. Get all events for today, Thursday, August 28, 2025. So that takes a short moment for the call to go through and then come back. I don't know, didn't somebody say the Wi-Fi is so amazing? All right, here we go. Here's your schedule, and you can see that it shows me all of those events. There's also the team dinner. And then, is my morning flight on time? So this will, yep, so it understood that it's Lufthansa 1, get flight data, and then it looks like you've already taken this flight. The slight departure delay didn't affect your arrival time. I hope your flight went smoothly. Right. So we don't have much time left. If we had more time, I would also show you that you can use those tools to modify your calendar events and stuff like that. So it's really good fun. So why use MCP? One, or maybe zero, it gives your AI applications superpowers because you can basically just tap into stuff that other people already built. One, it gives you unified access to APIs and data sources, right? So you might have a database somewhere and you want to make it accessible to everybody in the world, and to prevent them from having to learn your API, you build an MCP server so they can use your service. Two, you can even call local APIs, and we saw a little bit of that because the time API, that was a local API, but we can also tap into apps. And there is actually one more thing that I want to show you. So, and let's try this. So I first have to enable another tool. Okay. I am in Amsterdam at a conference. Can you please generate a presentation about what I should see in Amsterdam before I leave home? For home. Okay. So if this works, yeah, it does. Claude will now generate a presentation, and the first thing is it creates the outline, and then it wants to create a new presentation. So you can see that this is the command. We can allow this once. So in the background, you saw that there is a new keynote presentation. So now it wants to add a slide, and I'm just going to say allow always because it will now start creating lots of slides. So yeah, here we go. Cultural highlights, historic districts, authentic experiences. Nice. So it seems like I've got the rest of the week planned out. Safe travels and enjoy this beautiful city. So, perfect. I've created a comprehensive Amsterdam sightseeing presentation for you with 7 slides covering blah, 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 blah. Would you like me to start the presentation? Yes. All right. There you go. You came here for this presentation, so thanks. So the next thing after this presentation is lunch. So if you want to go and grab lunch, I won't be offended. Please feel free to do so. If you want to stick around for questions, I'm going to stick around for a couple more minutes. Also, feel free to find me later for stickers, and I'm also going to be here for the rest of the conference. So anybody who has questions, please raise your hand, and then I'm going to take them. Please, go ahead.
So at the end there, you showed us when you start an application through Claude. Has that something to do with Genkit? Or is it just Claude and your computer?
Yeah, so the question was, how was Claude able to start the application? So I'm going to show you how this works. So basically, I registered a server, an MCP server for Keynote, and in Claude, you can go to the developer section, and then you can see your local MCP servers, and you can see that I've got a couple of them registered here. You can go and say, edit the configuration, and then if I open that in an editor, you can see that these are all my local servers, and where's the Keynote server? So here's the Keynote server. So that basically is a Genkit application that uses automation on macOS to remotely control the Keynote application. But it could have been anything. So I could even run a shell script if I wanted to. Yes.
Does this kit have inbuilt function to talk to other agents, like using some Google protocol like API, or it has to be done through MCP and go to the HTTP API? Or never rollback to develop it?
Do you mean if Genkit has this capability? All right, so the question was, does Genkit have a capability to talk to other agents?
Via A2A protocols or ACP or any other?
Yeah, so Genkit is completely flexible, right? So it is a very open and flexible framework. So and you can write plugins for it, right? So for example, there are plugins for vector embeddings and for retrievers. So you can write your own plugins to connect to anything that's missing. So that is the answer.
A follow-up question.
Yeah.
Since these protocols are becoming very common, like one of them is from the Google A2A, which has 34,000 stars on GitHub. So do you want to add a native support instead of making it a plugin, make it a first-class citizen?
Okay, so the question is about what's the relationship between Genkit and Google's A2A, the agent-to-agent framework. So the bottom line is Genkit is much more general purpose, right? So it is a framework that you can use to do anything, right? And you saw that I use it to connect to Keynote. The agent-to-agent framework is much more specific. It is specifically made for building agents. So if you want something that is purpose-made for that, I would recommend using the agent-to-agent framework. But if you want something that is more general purpose, that you can, that you don't have to bend and twist to build something that is not an agent, then I think Genkit is the better option. You're welcome. Yes?
How are you exposing these tools to the LLM? Are you exposing these to APIs, or does Genkit internally build MCP server and then it is exposing it to the LLM? How is the communication happening between the two and the LLM?
So the question is, how does the LLM talk to my MCP servers? Is that?
To the tool.
To the tool. Okay, so that is a capability of. The question is, how does the model talk to the tool? What is the communication there? So maybe let's go back to the Genkit UI. where we can see that. So if we go into the trace, into the traces view, we can see all my past traces. And for example, if I go into this one for getting, that's not a tool call. Maybe that one, yeah. So what happens is my client, when it talks to the model, it sends a list of the tools that it supports. So you can see that here. And then the model needs to support tool calling. And what happens is the response from the tool call is not a simple answer, but it's a JSON object. And the JSON object, we can see down here, says, thanks for your kind request, but I would like to ask you to actually call this tool. Well, it's down here, sorry. So this is the part where the model says, sir, can you please call the tool? Down here. There you go. So here, tool request. That is where the model says, here's my answer. My answer is a question for you. And then my application basically has to parse that and say, all right, the model wants to call a tool. It calls a tool. It provides the answer as another generate call to the model. And then the model uses that answer to generate its response. And that might require another tool call. So, there might be a lot of back and forth. No, it's text-based. So that is, it's literally, if you were to sniff on the wire, you would see exactly what you're seeing here. You're welcome. Yes?
So I'm from the tech background, so please treat my question, sir. Example, I'm a brand, and I want user agent to discover my products and also buy it. But I don't want, I want to keep the controls at my end. How do I design an MCP to enable purchase, but to keep the controls on my own website?
Okay, so the question is, if you have a service and you want to expose the service via an MCP server and you want to keep in control over who can call it, for example, how do you do that? So you would have to add authentication to your MCP server, and that means some sort of API key or OAuth mechanism where you would require the user the developer to implement an authentication flow. So for the final user, depending on how it's implemented, for the final user, it would be completely transparent. But developers would have to go to your company's website and say, I want to register for using this API. And then they get an API key. And using that API key, they can call your service. And if they misbehave, you can revoke the API key, or you can charge them for usage. So that would be how you would implement that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it seems more like a jailbreak. Any more control, but easier without an API. I'm an e-commerce brand. I want purchase. I want people to shop around.
Yeah.
I don't want to give all my information, so ChatGPT does the purchase. How do I do without an API key?
That's an interesting question. I think I might have to think more about it. Let's talk about it offline.
Yeah, I would love that.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, one more question and then we'll wrap up.
I thought it was funny that you said, keep saying this might or might not work, and it's very relatable. How do you deal with inconsistency in results, and also do you have any other major struggles that you had come against in getting this version?
So the question was, I kept on saying this might or might not work because, during preparing this presentation, lots of the times it didn't work. And you saw that, when I asked why is the current time, it came back with a completely bogus answer that didn't make sense for what I was expecting. So the question is, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with making sure that inconsistent data, inconsistent responses don't completely throw the whole process off the rails. And there are a couple of ways how you can do that. So first of all, one technique that's built into Genkit is the reason why we say you need to specify the input and the output of a flow or a function or a tool is not just there to make it harder for you to write a tool or a function, lots more typing involved there, but also to help us verify the responses, right? So we both use that information to tell the model, hey, this is what the user is sending and this is what we want you to send back. And depending on what kind of model you use, the models will actually adhere to that. But we also use that to do type inference, and we will get the model response and we will evaluate if that actually matches what you said you want to get back. So that's one thing how Genkit helps with that. And then in terms of how do you make sure that you don't get like a complete left field answer that throws the model off, I think what you would have to do is add more validation and maybe add a prompt rewriting step in there that says, well, here is what the user said. Can you please make sure that this is a good prompt that works for what we want to do here? So that would be one technique.
Because in the example for the flights, it can be very tricky because
Yeah.
the way flights are mentioned, maybe online or your ticket or on your calendar,
Yep.
can be different. So you can get
Absolutely, yeah. So the data that is used for storing the flight information on the calendar might be completely, the user might have typed it themselves, or it's from the ticket information. So it's very unstructured in that way, right? So you need to first coerce that structuredness, and that in itself might be an AI step where you take information and say, okay, so this is what is on the user's calendar event. Can you please make sure that this is structured in the correct way for this API? Yeah, so that would work. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.